You will apologize to her. Here now, in front of everyone." The words rang in Alexander Hawthorne's head like a verdict. His own voice, moments earlier, had been so sharp, so cruel, but now another voice, Margaret Whitfield's, cut through the air like a blade of ice. Guests froze mid-breath, crystal glasses suspended. For the first time in years, Alexander felt the ground shift under him. But rewind just 20 minutes. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers, golden light scattering across polished marble floors. A string quartet hummed softly, the air thick with perfume and champagne laughter. Waitstaff glided between tables, black vests and white shirts blending into the scenery like shadows. Evelyn Carter balanced a silver tray, her steps light despite shoes that pinched her toes. She kept her chin tucked, her curls pinned back neatly. Every motion was deliberate, graceful, learned from years of serving at banquets like this. Inside, however, her chest was tight. She had promised herself she wouldn't let anyone rattle her tonight. Not the rich men who never looked her in the eye, not the women who tapped impatiently on empty glasses. She only needed to survive this shift. The secret she carried, the one thing no one here suspected, would make tonight different. At the corner table, Alexander Hawthorne sat with his back straight, an expensive watch gleaming under his cuff. His expression was carved in cold marble. He had already dismissed 2 waiters for being too slow. His ice-blue eyes scanned the room with the same impatience he used in boardrooms. Every second was money. Every person was either useful or invisible. When Evelyn approached his table, he barely glanced at her. "Water," he said, voice flat. "Yes, sir," she replied softly, setting the pitcher against the rim of his glass. But a tremor in her wrist betrayed her. Just a drop too fast, just a shimong. Whir of liquid landing on his cuff. The gasp was small, almost inaudible, but Alexander saw it, felt it, and in a flash, fury overtook him. "You clumsy little—" His chair screeched back. He grabbed the pitcher from her hand, water sloshing. Before Evelyn could move, before the crowd could register, he tilted it, pouring cold water over her uniform. The sound was louder than it should have been, the water hitting fabric in cruel rhythm. Evelyn stood rigid, every muscle screaming for her to run, but she stayed. Her chest rose and fell sharply. The room fell silent. Dozens of eyes burned into her soaked blouse, the humiliation like fire crawling up her skin. Her hazel eyes glistened but did not spill over. She clenched her jaw, held her tray steady even as her hands shook. Alexander sneered, shaking the last drops from the pitcher. "This is why I hate hiring incompetents," he muttered, his voice pitched to be heard. "Even water is too much for some." A ripple moved through the crowd, uncomfortable laughter from a few, whispers from others. No one dared confront him. Evelyn lowered her gaze, her breath shallow, but something in her posture shifted. She didn't crumple, she didn't beg. She stood, drenched, eyes forward, as if the cruelty had bounced off her skin. Jonas Miller, Alexander's right-hand man, shifted uneasily at his side. He knew his boss's temper, but this was different. The silence in the hall was heavy, disapproving. Margaret Whitfield rose from her seat near the stage. Her pearls glimmered under the light as she looked first at Alexander, then at Evelyn. Her face, calm but thunderous, said everything. But she said nothing, not yet. The quartet faltered, then resumed. Waiters shuffled awkwardly. Evelyn turned, walking back toward the service doors, her wet shoes squeaking softly. Alexander exhaled, settling back in his chair, satisfied. "Perhaps next time they'll learn to screen who they hire," he muttered. What he didn't know, what no one at his table knew, was that the night had only just begun, and the girl he had drenched was about to stand where no amount of money could shield him. Behind the velvet curtain at the far end of the ballroom, Evelyn slipped into the side room. She peeled her wet vest from her shoulders, her breathing shallow, her cheeks burning with shame. She wanted to crumble, to vanish, but she remembered the promise she made to her grandmother, the woman who had raised her on gospel hymns and whispered courage. "Never let them take your song," her grandmother had said. Her heart hammered as she touched the simple black dress hanging on the rack. Tonight she would wear it. Tonight the voice she had hidden behind aprons and trays would finally be heard. And the man who humiliated her would sit powerless, with no defense but silence. The clink of cutlery and glasses tried to patch the silence that Alexander had torn open, but the ballroom never quite recovered its sheen. Laughter was thinner now, conversations hushed. Guests avoided glancing at the billionaire, though he sat smugly, swirling the ice in his whiskey as though nothing had happened. At the far end of the room, Margaret Whitfield tapped her wine glass, her face a mask of elegance. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice commanding but warm, "thank you for your generous contributions tonight. Before our keynote, we have a surprise." The chatter dimmed. Alexander tilted his head with mild annoyance. He hated surprises. "In just a few moments, you'll witness a performance from one of our brightest stars," Margaret continued. "Someone whose journey embodies the very spirit of this foundation." Evelyn stood backstage, clutching the microphone with damp palms. Her heart thudded against her ribs. Beneath the stage lights, she could already see faces waiting, some bored, some curious, skeptical. And near the center, Alexander leaned back in his chair, his expression carved in arrogance. She swallowed hard. The sting of water still clung to her skin, the humiliation echoing in her mind. But another memory pushed through. Her grandmother's trembling hands clasped in prayer, her whisper in Evelyn's ear, "Your voice is your freedom." Stagehands adjusted the spotlight. Evelyn exhaled shakily, pressing her lips together. This was her chance. She could either vanish, humiliated, or step forward and risk everything. Back at the table, Jonas Miller leaned toward Alexander. "You might want to keep an open mind," he murmured, though he wasn't sure why he said it. Something about the waitress's quiet dignity had unsettled him. Alexander scoffed. "Open mind? For another amateur plucked off the street? Spare me." Margaret's smile softened as she caught Evelyn's eye from across the stage. She gave a small, firm nod, the kind only a mentor could give. The curtain began to rise. Evelyn stepped into the light. The ballroom gasped. Some recognized her immediately. The drenched waitress, her uniform traded for a simple black dress that hugged her figure with modest grace. Her curls, released from pins, framed her face like a crown. The stage lights kissed her brown skin, making her glow. Alexander's glass froze halfway to his lips. His smirk faltered. Evelyn held the microphone, both hands wrapped around it to steady herself. For a moment, the silence was unbearable. She could feel every stare, every whisper. Then she closed her eyes. Her voice rose, soft at first, velvet, fragile, the kind of sound that seemed to come from the marrow, not the throat. Conversations halted mid-breath. The first verse drifted through the hall, filling corners the chandeliers couldn't touch. And then her voice soared, full, aching, resonant, rich with the gospel roots that had raised her. It was the voice of heartbreak and hope stitched together. A voice that could not be ignored. The crowd was spellbound. Some leaned forward, others pressed fingers to lips, eyes wide. The clatter of silverware ceased entirely. Alexander stared, his jaw tight. Every note struck something in him he didn't want touched. Memories he had buried surfaced uninvited. His mother's voice, soft and trembling, singing him to sleep before his father silenced her. The way he had vowed never to need anyone, never to feel. But this girl, this waitress, was undoing him note by note. At the back of the room, a guest whispered, "Isn't that the girl he—" She didn't finish. Eyes darted toward Alexander, then back to Evelyn. Margaret allowed herself the faintest smile. The humiliation he had crafted was unraveling into spectacle, and not in his favor. Evelyn opened her eyes briefly. She saw the faces blurred in the glow, saw the awe and the tears beginning in the front row. But when her gaze landed on Alexander, her chest tightened. His cold eyes, no longer cold, but shocked, conflicted, met hers. She didn't flinch. She sang harder. The power shifted in the room, subtle but undeniable. No longer was she the girl soaked in water. She was the voice commanding a crowd of the wealthiest, the proudest, the most powerful. They were hers. And Alexander Hawthorne, billionaire, untouchable titan of industry, sat frozen, speechless for the first time in years. Evelyn held the final note, her lungs burning, her soul poured bare into the sound. When silence fell, it was heavy and sacred, the kind of silence that follows revelation. Then came the thunder. Applause erupted, rolling through the hall like a storm. People leapt to their feet, clapping, whistling, crying out her name. Evelyn lowered the microphone, her shoulders trembling, tears finally spilling. But not from humiliation, from triumph. And Alexander could only stare, the glass slipping from his fingers, shattering against the marble floor. The applause rolled on like a wave crashing against marble walls. Evelyn stood rooted to the stage, breath heaving, cheeks flushed. She had imagined moments like this in dreams she didn't dare speak aloud, standing under lights, not chandeliers meant for others, but her own spotlight. Now it was real. And in the crowd, all eyes weren't on her. Many had turned toward Alexander Hawthorne. He sat rigid, jaw clenched, his shattered glass glinting at his feet. The man who poured water on her minutes ago now seemed stripped bare, caught in an invisible spotlight of his own. Whispers flitted from table to table like sparks leaping across dry grass. Isn't she the waitress? She's incredible. He dumped water on her. Him! I saw it! Alexander's throat tightened. He heard them, every word, though none were louder than the echo in his own chest. She's just a waitress. Just a waitress. But the words rang hollow now. His eyes followed her on stage as she bowed, trembling, then straightened with poise far beyond her years. The applause wasn't slowing, it was growing. Guests were chanting her name. Evelyn. Evelyn. Jonas leaned in, his voice low but sharp. You made a mistake. Alexander's glare snapped to him. Watch yourself. But Jonas didn't waver. This is bigger than you think. People saw what you did. And now they're seeing her. You can't bury this. For the first time, Alexander felt heat creep under his collar. The same power he wielded in boardrooms, the fear he inspired with a single outburst. None of it was working here. Instead, the power belonged to the girl he'd drenched. Backstage, Evelyn pressed a hand to her chest. Her ribs still buzzed with adrenaline, her throat raw from pouring out every wound, every hope into her song. Margaret approached, her hands warm on Evelyn's shoulders. You did it, Margaret whispered, eyes glistening. Oh, you've just changed everything. Evelyn shook her head, still trembling. I wasn't ready, my clothes. You were perfect, Margaret interrupted, her tone final. Better than perfect. And they know it. Evelyn's lips parted, stunned. She'd sung in church halls, in small cafes where no one listened, but never like this, never commanding a room of power and wealth, and never under the gaze of the man who had humiliated her. At his table, Alexander's hand tightened around his whiskey glass, another one, poured too quickly by a nervous waiter. His reflection in the amber liquid unsettled him. The room's admiration for Evelyn clawed at him like betrayal. He had spent his life building walls of steel around his name, his fortune, his reputation. But this girl had cracked them in a single performance. Worse, she reminded him of things he wanted buried. His mother's face in candlelight, her voice trembling as she sang lullabies before his father stormed in to silence her. He had hated weakness ever since, hated vulnerability, hated reminders of her. And Evelyn's voice carried all of it. He slammed the glass down harder than intended. The table jumped. Guests nearby flinched. Alexander caught their stares and snapped, "What are you looking at?" They looked away, but not quickly enough. The whispers continued, louder now. He's furious. He's embarrassed. Serves him right. The evening's program limped forward. A speaker took the stage, but few listened. Evelyn lingered backstage, torn between relief and dread. She wanted to disappear, yet Margaret urged her to stay for the closing. They'll ask for an encore, Margaret said. You'll be ready. Evelyn shook her head. I don't want to see him again. Not after... She stopped, her voice cracking. Margaret's grip on her hand tightened. Don't let him be the reason you step away. Let him be the reason you stand taller. Evelyn inhaled slowly, nodding. Her grandmother's words echoed again. Never let them take your soul. Meanwhile, Alexander excused himself from the table, striding toward the corridor with long, stormy steps. Jonas followed at a distance. The billionaire's fists were tight, his breath ragged. She humiliated me, Alexander spat. That's what this is. Jonas's reply was steady. No, you humiliated her. She just reminded everyone she's more than what you said. Alexander spun, his face twisted in rage. She's nothing, a servant playing dress-up. But even as he said it, the words trembled. They sounded weak, hollow, like a man arguing with his own reflection. Jonas saw it. The cracks. And deep inside, though Alexander refused to admit it, he felt something he hadn't in decades. Fear. Not of Evelyn, but of what she awakened in him. The truth that power built on cruelty crumbles the moment dignity rises against it. Back in the ballroom, Margaret prepared the microphone again. She glanced toward the curtain where Evelyn stood waiting. And somewhere in the shadows, Alexander clenched his jaw, knowing the night wasn't finished with him yet. The tension in the hall was electric, ready to ignite. "Do you see what you've done, Alexander?" Margaret Whitfield's voice rang through the ballroom, steady as iron wrapped in silk. She had taken the microphone after the keynote speaker, her eyes sweeping across the crowd. "You all witnessed cruelty tonight. You all witnessed dignity answer it with song. That," she pointed to Evelyn, who stood trembling just beyond the curtain, "is what this foundation stands for. Not wealth, not arrogance, but courage." A collective murmur rippled through the guests, heads turned. And for the first time all night, Alexander Hawthorne was not in control. He sat rigid at his table, blue eyes fixed on the stage, though his jaw ached from grinding. Heat prickled up his neck. He was used to controlling the narrative, paying the press, writing stories. But this wasn't paper or ink. This was flesh, voice, and truth, ringing out in front of hundreds. Margaret's tone softened. "We have been honored by the voice of a young woman who should never have been dismissed, demeaned, or disrespected. Evelyn Carter, will you join us again?" The ballroom erupted in applause, cheers rising to the vaulted ceiling. Evelyn hesitated backstage, her stomach twisted. Returning meant facing him, facing the man who had soaked her in front of everyone. Her hand trembled on the microphone. She could almost feel the cold water dripping again, the laughter in her ears. But then, another memory. Her grandmother, wrinkled hands clapping in a tiny church as Evelyn sang her first solo. "The gift God gave you isn't for hiding, baby. It's for lifting the room when it's darkest." Evelyn lifted her chin. She stepped forward. The crowd rose as she appeared, the ovation swelling louder than before. She was no longer the waitress. They didn't see the uniform, the tray, the spilled water. They saw the artist, the woman. Evelyn gripped the microphone. Her voice shook, not from fear, but from fire. "I wasn't supposed to sing tonight," she began. A hush swept across the room. "I came here to serve, to bring water to your tables. And for some, that's all they thought I could ever do." Her eyes flicked toward Alexander. 100 heads followed. His face tightened, but his chest burned. He couldn't look away. Evelyn continued, her tone gaining strength. "But we are all more than what people see in a uniform, more than the way they judge us, dismiss us, or try to silence us." Her gaze swept the hall. "Tonight I was humiliated. But I will not stay humiliated because no one can take away the voice God placed in me." The crowd roared, some shouting her name again. Tears glistened down Margaret's cheeks. Jonas, standing at the edge of the room, closed his eyes, struck by the weight of it. Evelyn lifted the mic higher, and then, without waiting, "For music," she sang again, this time unaccompanied, a hymn her grandmother had taught her. The rawness of her voice filled the cavernous hall like stained glass, catching sunlight. The audience rose to their feet as one. People who had never prayed in years folded hands instinctively. It was not performance now, it was testimony. And in the center of it all, Alexander felt his walls collapsing. Every note pierced him. He saw his mother's face again, soft and strong, the one person who ever loved him without condition. He had spent years burying her memory, scorning the tenderness she gave, hating the way his father destroyed her spirit. And now, this waitress, this Evelyn, was forcing it back into the light. His throat closed. His eyes burned. He wanted to rise, to leave, to escape before anyone saw, but his legs would not move. He was a prisoner of the truth she sang. The final note rang out, trembling into silence. Evelyn lowered the mic, tears glistening, chest heaving. Silence. Sacred. Then, applause like thunder. Shouts. Whistles. The sound of 100 hearts breaking and mending at once. Margaret stepped forward, laying a hand on Evelyn's shoulder. "Ladies and gentlemen, Evelyn Carter." The ovation rose again, louder still. Alexander, shaking now, pushed back his chair. The noise swallowed him whole, eyes everywhere. He could feel the demand pressing in. A reckoning. And then Margaret turned to him, her gaze sharp as steel. She spoke without mic, but the words carried. You will apologize to her, here now, in front of everyone. The hall fell silent again, hundreds of eyes swinging to him. Alexander's chest heaved, his hands curled into fists. He could feel every ounce of pride screaming to resist, but his lips trembled, his body betrayed him. And for the first time in years, the mighty Alexander Hawthorne was utterly, terrifyingly human. The silence was unbearable. It pressed down on Alexander like a lead weight. Every eye in the ballroom was fixed on him, some curious, some expectant, others burning with quiet anger. He could hear his own breath, sharp and ragged. Evelyn stood on stage, not flinching, not bowing her head. She didn't cower as she had beneath his pitcher of water. She stood taller, her black dress glowing beneath the light, her hands folded calmly over the microphone. She didn't need to demand anything. Her presence demanded it for her. Alexander's throat tightened. He rose slowly from his chair. The legs of his chair scraped against the marble floor, echoing across the room. Margaret folded her arms, her chin raised. Jonas stepped into the shadows, watching carefully. The billionaire's voice cracked as he tried to speak. He swallowed, his tongue dry as sandpaper. The words refused to come. His chest burned with shame, pride strangling him. Murmurs rose from the crowd. Is he going to do it? He has to. After what he did to her. Evelyn's eyes locked with his. For a moment, he saw not just her, but his mother again. The memory of her eyes when she pleaded with his father not to shout at her, not to break her down, and how Alexander, as a boy, had stood in the corner, too afraid to intervene. The memory shattered him. His legs shook. I was wrong, he whispered, the words almost lost. He cleared his throat, forcing his voice louder. I humiliated you. I disrespected you. And... His breath caught. His hand gripped the table for support. I am sorry. Gasps rippled across the hall. The mighty Alexander Hawthorne, cold, ruthless, untouchable, had just apologized publicly to a waitress. Evelyn didn't move, didn't answer. She simply watched him, her gaze calm but unreadable. The crowd leaned forward, waiting for her response. Alexander's mask cracked further, his blue eyes glistened. Please, he said, softer now. The word please tasted foreign, bitter, and wide, yet freeing. Forgive me. The crowd erupted in whispers. Some guests nodded approvingly. Others exchanged shocked glances. Jonas pressed his lips together, quietly astonished. He had worked beside Alexander for 10 years and never once heard the man admit fault. Margaret's eyes softened. She leaned toward Evelyn, whispering, The choice is yours. Evelyn gripped the microphone tighter. Her voice was low but steady. I don't sing for your forgiveness. I don't sing for your approval. I sing because it's who I am. The words rang through the hall like a bell. Alexander's chest heaved. His pride wanted to recoil, to snarl, but all he could do was lower his head. He had nothing to offer. The audience broke into applause, not for him, but for her, for the girl who had turned humiliation into triumph, for the waitress who had stood taller than a billionaire. Evelyn bowed her head slightly, then turned to Margaret. May I? She asked softly. Margaret nodded, stepping back. Evelyn lifted the mic again. This song, she said, her voice trembling now, isn't for me. It's for anyone who's ever been told they're less than. Anyone who's been silenced or mocked. Tonight, I want you to know. You are more than they say you are. The hall roared again, louder, as she launched into a final number. The band caught her cue, swelling behind her. Evelyn's voice soared higher, bolder than ever before. Alexander sat down heavily, his hands over his face. The crowd no longer cared about him. They were hers now. Jonas leaned against the wall, shaking his head in disbelief. He had never seen power shift so completely, so beautifully. By the time Evelyn finished, people were on their feet, some in tears, some shouting her name. Margaret clasped Evelyn's hands, lifting them high. And Alexander Hawthorne, billionaire, tycoon, terror of boardrooms, sat hunched at his table, his body trembling, his pride shattered in front of the world. The gala hall buzzed long after Evelyn's final note faded. Guests swarmed around her, hands outstretched, voices tumbling over one another. Praise, congratulations, astonishment. Some called her an angel, others swore they had never heard anything like it. For the first time in her life, Evelyn wasn't invisible. Margaret guided her through the crowd like a guardian, proud and fierce. "Remember this moment," she whispered. "They're not clapping for wealth or power or reputation. They're clapping for truth." Evelyn smiled faintly, her chest aching from the weight of it all. But her gaze flicked just once across the room. Alexander still sat alone at his table, shoulders hunched, eyes fixed on the empty glass in front of him. The mighty billionaire now looked small, lost in the echo of his downfall. The whispers hadn't stopped. They swirled around him like smoke. Did you see how he poured water on her? Unforgivable. He begged. I swear he begged her. That girl outshone him in every way. For a man who had lived on power and fear, humiliation was worse than death. Jonas crossed the room, pausing by his employer's side. He leaned down, his voice low. "They won't forget this, Alex. Not the papers, not the donors. Tonight we'll follow you." Alexander didn't look up. His hands were pressed together, fingers digging into his brow. He could still hear Evelyn's voice tearing through the armor he had built for decades. Jonas added softer, "But maybe that's not a bad thing." The billionaire finally lifted his head. His eyes, red-rimmed, raw, met Jonas's. For once, he didn't have a sharp retort, just silence. On stage, Margaret tapped the mic. "Friends, let us honor the true spirit of this evening. Tonight, Evelyn Carter has given us more than music. She has given us courage. And with that, we close the Horizon Foundation Gala." Thunderous applause filled the air. Evelyn bowed once more, her curls tumbling around her face, then stepped down into Margaret's waiting arms. Guests began to disperse, some lingering to speak with Evelyn. Business cards slipped into her hand, offers of connections, promises of opportunity. Her heart pounded with disbelief. Just hours ago she was invisible, carrying trays. Now doors she'd never imagined were swinging open. But as the crowd thinned, her eyes found Alexander again, still seated, still unmoving. Something inside her twisted, not pity exactly, but recognition. For all his cruelty, he looked like a man drowning, and no amount of wealth could keep him afloat. When nearly everyone had left, the hall echoed in silence. Evelyn gathered her things, her uniform still damp, her borrowed dress folded carefully over her arm. Margaret had gone ahead to coordinate with donors. Jonas stood near the exit, speaking with staff. Only Alexander remained at the table. As Evelyn passed, he stirred. His voice was hoarse. "Miss Carter." She stopped. Slowly, she turned. He rose from his chair, not with his usual sharp authority, but unsteadily, like a man unused to standing without walls around him. His blue eyes met hers, and she saw they were no longer cold, but broken. "I know my apology tonight wasn't enough," he said, each word heavy. "I've spent years believing power gave me the right to treat people as less. But your voice, it reminded me of something I lost, someone I lost." His throat tightened. "And I can't undo what I did. But I am, truly, sorry." The hall was quiet except for their breathing. Evelyn studied him. She thought of her grandmother, of forgiveness preached on Sundays. But she also thought of the water running down her skin, the sting of humiliation. Finally she spoke, calm and steady. "I don't carry your shame, Mr. Hawthorne. You do. What you do with it is up to you." Her words struck like a verdict, not vengeance, but truth. Alexander lowered his head. His chest heaved once, then again, before his voice cracked. "Thank you." Evelyn nodded once, then turned, walking toward the doors with her dress in her arms. Jonas watched her go, then looked at Alexander. The man who had been unshakable for as long as he'd known him, now trembling. For the first time, Jonas thought, maybe there was hope for him yet, but only if he chose it. That night, the headlines would not read of Alexander's wealth or his foundation. They would read of a waitress turned star, of Evelyn Carter's voice that brought a billionaire to his knees. And Alexander knew it was the truth. Morning broke over the city with a quiet, golden haze. For Evelyn, the night felt like both a dream and a battle scar. She sat on her narrow bed in her small apartment, the gala dress hanging neatly over the chair, her waitress uniform damp in a bag at her feet. Her phone buzzed endlessly, texts, emails, numbers she didn't recognize. Margaret had already promised to connect her with a vocal coach, with producers, with opportunities Evelyn had never dared to whisper aloud. But what lingered most wasn't the applause or the offers. It was the look in Alexander Hawthorne's eyes when he spoke his apology. Raw, hollow, human. She touched the locket at her neck, her grandmother's. "You were right," she whispered. "They can't take your dignity unless you give it away." Meanwhile, in a penthouse high above the city, Alexander sat alone in his office, the skyline stretched beyond the glass. Papers lay scattered across his desk, untouched. He had not slept. The voices of the gala haunted him. The gasps, the whispers, the moment Evelyn's song pierced the air. But it wasn't just humiliation that lingered. It was revelation. For years he had hidden his grief behind rage, burying the memory of a younger sister whose voice once filled their home before tragedy struck. Evelyn's song had torn that wound wide open, forcing him to feel what he had spent decades suffocating. His reflection in the glass startled him. Not the perfect titan of industry, but a man unraveling. For the first time, Alexander asked himself, what if my empire means nothing if I've forgotten how to be human? Later that week, Evelyn found herself on a small stage again, not a glittering gala, but the community center she and her grandmother used to visit. Children gathered in front, their eyes wide, their voices joining hers as she led them in a simple song. She laughed freely, her curls bouncing, her heart lighter than it had been in years. Margaret watched from the doorway, smiling. "This is where you belong," she said softly when Evelyn finished. "Among people who see you, not just what you can do." Evelyn nodded. Fame or not, she knew this truth. Her gift wasn't for the wealthy or powerful. It was for anyone who needed hope. That same afternoon, Alexander arrived unannounced. He didn't wear the armor of a suit, only a plain shirt, sleeves rolled. He looked smaller. The children eyed him curiously, whispers rising. "Is that the man from the news?" He stood awkwardly at the edge of the room until Evelyn noticed. Their eyes met. "Why are you here?" she asked, her tone even. "I made a donation," he said quietly. "Not for recognition. Just to keep this place alive. Places like this matter." He paused. "I didn't understand that before." Evelyn studied him, searching for arrogance. But she saw none. Only sincerity. She inclined her head. "Then let the children thank you, not me." He accepted her words with a small nod, his eyes softening as the children's laughter filled the air. For once, he didn't try to control the room. He simply listened. Weeks passed. Opportunities continued to knock for Evelyn. Recordings, performances, interviews. But she stayed grounded, returning often to the community center, her voice carrying more than music itself, airy dignity reclaimed. Alexander began to change, slowly, visibly. Reports surfaced of him treating employees with fairness, of foundations receiving quiet support without his name attached. Some called it damage control. Others whispered it was redemption. But those closest to him saw something deeper, the beginning of humility. One evening, months later, Evelyn stood on a stage brighter and larger than the gala. A theater filled to the rafters, an audience waiting in silence. As the lights dimmed, she closed her eyes. The memory of water splashing across her skin no longer burned. It felt distant, like a storm that had passed. She opened her mouth and her voice soared, clear, powerful, unbroken. The sound washed over the audience, uniting strangers in a shared breath of wonder. Backstage, unseen, Alexander listened from the shadows, his eyes closed, his lips pressed into something close to a prayer. He knew he could never undo what he had done, but he could carry its lesson forever. When the final note hung in the air and the audience erupted, Evelyn bowed deeply, tears glistening in her eyes. Not from pain, but from gratitude. She had walked into the gala as a waitress. She walked off this stage as herself, whole, unashamed, triumphant. And for the first time in his life, Alexander Hawthorne stood, not as a man above others, but as one among them, clapping until his hands ached. The storm had ended. A new story had begun.